Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. Today's weather, well, actually for tomorrow's weather, we do have a high wind watch for the central panhandle, Sitka area and inland from there for pretty strong winds expected tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow night. 60 to 70 mile an hour winds are going to be blowing through those areas. Well, let's get started by taking a look at our satellite imagery over the state of Alaska. And the first thing we'll notice is this frontal system out in the Bering Sea going through the central Aleutian Islands. That's not going to have a major impact on our weather. It's going to bring some rain across the Aleutian Islands, but there's another system that'll be following this. That's going to be a big deal. Now, down here towards southeast Alaska, as we put the loop in motion, you'll see that we start to see this cloud shield coming up with the frontal system associated with the low that's off the imagery. That low pressure system is going to spin on up, intensify, moving off to just off the coast of southeast Alaska by tomorrow, and that's going to create some pretty strong winds there. Taking a look now at weather around the state today. We did have this weak area of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, trough that was extending down towards southeast Alaska, kept the panhandle pretty much in the rain throughout the day today, right on up into the North Gulf Coast, eastern Prince William Sound area. In the eastern Copper River Basin, there was some scattered snow showers associated with this weak area of low pressure here. And then also in that eastern Tanana Valley had some moisture moving in from the east, and that was resulting in some light snow there. Had this trough extending right on up into the central interior from our low down in the Gulf. Some isolated snow showers were occurring, particularly up into the western interior. Down in the Cook Inlet region, really didn't have much of an impact there. Up along the Arctic coast, high pressure up in the Arctic is pushing these typical low clouds, that stratus, fog, and flurry type scenario occurring throughout much of the Arctic coast and the north slope of the Brooks Range. And then out into the Bering Sea, we have our frontal system. There's a bit of wind ahead of that front, and it's rainy, but this is just the precursor to a really big storm that we're paying attention to right now that's going to be impacting the region by Friday. Taking a look now at the forecast for tonight, and now you can start to see the low pressure system that's going to be coming up towards southeast Alaska. This thing is going to be rapidly intensifying, and that's going to cause those strong winds tomorrow afternoon and evening in the central panhandle. But for tonight, expect rain showers throughout the panhandle up into the White Pass area. The rain showers for lower in elevation, snow showers and snow, possibly an inch or two accumulation up into the top of the pass there. Same thing along the North Gulf Coast here, rain down towards sea level as you get up into the mountains like north of Valdez. A mixture of rain and snow showers or just snow showers up there. Chance of some snow showers again this evening in that eastern Tanana Valley. Clear cold conditions across the interior, basically from the eastern Brooks Range right on down towards Bristol Bay and over towards the Seward Peninsula. Flurries and fog persisting along the Arctic coast, and then we have our system in the frontal system in the Bering Sea continuing its eastward trek, bringing rain to the eastern Aleutian Islands, likely to bring rain to the Pribilof Islands, and then post-frontally you'll see some breaks in the clouds and just a chance of some showers tonight in the western Aleutian Islands. This system pretty much falls apart Wednesday. The front is falling apart. You still have this elongated trough of low pressure right down to what will become the main low pressure system south of the eastern Aleutian Islands. So still expecting rain in the eastern Aleutian Islands, right on up into the Pribilof Islands and into the central Bering Sea. Some showers out into the central to western Aleutian Islands. And then as we change our focus back to the Gulf of Alaska, here's this strong low pressure system that's not a very deep low pressure system, but it has a tight pressure gradient around it. That's going to result in those strong winds basically in the Sitka area and that southern third of the Panhandle. As I said earlier, there's a high wind watch out for winds potentially up to 60 to 70 miles an hour there. Along with that, expect rain to be moving into the picture again throughout the southern half of the Panhandle. Along the North Gulf Coast, some showers in the southern portions of Prince William Sound and the northern portions of the Sound up towards Thompson Pass and in the Chugach Mountains. Some scattered snow showers there, and cloudy conditions in the eastern interior. Sunny conditions over the interior from the eastern Brooks Range right on down towards the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, as well as the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound, and once again flurries and fog persisting along the Arctic coast. Taking a look now at the forecast for Thursday, that low pressure system that was going to produce those winds in southeast Alaska, it pretty much dies out. It becomes engulfed into this next system coming up into the Gulf of Alaska. This is going to bring that front on up into the picture, and by late in the day, as this front continues to move to the north and east, it'll bring some more winds to southeast Alaska. Scattered shower conditions can be expected in the Panhandle with the persistent onshore flow. Generally cloudy conditions along the North Gulf Coast and western Prince William Sound, basically south of the Chugach Mountains. North of the coastal mountains, sunny conditions can be expected across the entire state right on up through the Arctic coast and over into that Bering Strait region. And then on the north side of this low pressure system, rain should be wrapping around the low across the Alaska Peninsula, possibly mixed with snow on the north side of the peninsula and up towards the Pribilof Islands, showers out towards the eastern Aleutian Islands. And then we take a look out into the extreme western Aleutian Islands and western Bering Sea. We see this warm front starting to come into the picture. This is the advanced frontal system with the remnants of the super typhoon that was in the South Pacific. That's going to be moving on up into the picture. That's going to become a rather intense storm moving into the western Bering Sea Friday, Saturday time frame. So we'll just keep monitoring that situation. That storm has the potential to produce hurricane force winds with it. Taking a look now at temperatures around the state today. Temperatures in southeast Alaska generally in the 40s, upper 30s in the northern portion of the Panhandle, 30s and 40s along the North Gulf Coast, single digits as you move on up into the eastern interior, right around 10 degrees in the Copper River Basin, a bit warmer in the Susitna Valley in the low to mid 30s there. Moving on up towards the Arctic coast and the Brooks Range, temperatures below zero in Fort Yukon as well as up into the AKwx Pass area. Temperatures in the single digits above zero across much of the Arctic coast. Moving on down towards the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound and the Norton Sound area. Temperatures generally in the 20s there. And then taking a look at the southwest part of the state in the Aleutians and Bering Sea, temperatures were in the teens to low 30s in the Bristol Bay area, in the teens to upper 20s in the Kuskokwim Delta. Generally in the 30s across the Alaska Peninsula, 40 in that Dutch Harbor area, mid-30s in the Pribilof Islands, and out across the Aleutian Islands, temperatures remained in the mid-40s. Taking a look at our low temperatures expected for tonight. Southeast Alaska, 30s and low 40s are what you can anticipate for tonight. Temperatures along the North Gulf Coast, mid-20s to mid-30s in the teens as you move on over towards the northern Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley. Single digits, possibly even see some negative readings in the Copper River Basin. Single digits above and below zero in the eastern interior to the minus teens as we move on up towards the eastern Brooks Range and as well as AKwx Pass area. Single digits above and below zero along the Arctic coast. Same thing as we move on over towards Kotzebue Sound. Temperatures in the about 10 to 15 in the Norton Sound area. Single digits inland of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coastal areas with low 20s right along the coast. Temperatures in the 20s across the Alaska Peninsula to the mid-30s over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Low 30s in the Pribilof Islands with temperatures generally right around 40 over the remainder of the Aleutian Islands. For our highs tomorrow, mid to upper 40s excuse me, throughout southeast Alaska. Temperatures along the North Gulf Coast in the mid-30s. Teens in the Copper River Basin up into the Tanana Valley to single digits above zero in the upper Yukon Valley, single digits above zero across much of the Arctic coast, although up by Circle, expect your temperatures to stay below zero even for your highs tomorrow. Single digits right around 10 degrees in the Kotzebue Sound area to the teens as we move on over towards that Bering Strait region, 20s in the Norton Sound area to teens as we get over towards the Yukon Delta, teens and 20s to the Kuskokwim Delta with 20s to 30s in the Bristol Bay area and 30s to low 40s over the Alaska Peninsula. low 40s to mid 40s across the Aleutian Islands, and upper 30s in the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look now at our flying weather for tomorrow. IFR conditions in the southern panhandle with some marginal conditions mixed in there as well. Marginal conditions are very likely along the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, basically south of the Chugach Mountains on the ocean side of the mountains. Also some marginal conditions extending on up along the Alaska Range, basically south of the Rainy Pass area there. Marginal conditions across Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, much of the eastern Bering Sea. Right in advance of that frontal boundary, some IFR conditions can be expected across the Pribilof Islands down to the eastern Aleutian Islands, with marginal conditions throughout the remainder of the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands. And up along the Arctic coast with the flurries and fog there, marginal conditions are what you should anticipate for tomorrow in that region. Taking a look at our passes for tomorrow, Anaktuvik Pass, expect VFR conditions as well as VFR conditions for Adigan Pass. Down to the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, marginal conditions are what you should anticipate for tomorrow. Rainy Pass will be VFR, as will Windy Pass, excuse me, Isabel Pass, and Mentasta Pass. Down to the Chugach Mountains, VFR conditions for Tonita Pass with marginal conditions in Portage Pass. And then down in southeast Alaska, VFR conditions might start off marginal in the morning, but generally VFR conditions for the majority of the day. Taking a look now at our freezing levels. Freezing levels in southeast Alaska, basically at the surface in the northern panhandle, sloping up to about 4,000 feet when you get down towards Dixon Entrance. Freezing levels right along the North Gulf Coast, right around 2,000 feet at the surface as you follow the coastal mountains right on down through Cook Inlet and north of Kodiak Island. And then freezing levels are sloping up to about 2,000 feet as we move on out across the Aleutian Islands and down to the surface as we get into the northern Bering Sea. Taking a look at our icing for tomorrow, the only area of concern for icing is southern southeast Alaska, that southern third of the panhandle. Could be pretty intense icing, mixed icing from the freezing level to about 20,000 feet, occasional widespread mixed icing, so that should be a concern if you're flying in that area tomorrow. Taking a look at our jet stream for tomorrow, starting off at about 125 knots coming off of the northern Japan Kamchatka Peninsula and accelerating to 150 knots south of the Aleutian Islands to 120 knots south of the Alaska Peninsula. Then as we come on down south of the Gulf of Alaska, tapers off to 85 knots and then increases again to about 125 knots as it moves inland across Vancouver Island into North America there. Now as we move on down to the 9,000 foot level, generally speaking, the winds in the panhandle are not going to be too strong except right in that southern panhandle where that next low pressure system is coming up. This will be later in the day. Early on, light winds rapidly increasing to about 55 knots there. Light winds over the majority of the interior right on to the Bristol Bay coast with about 20 to 25 knot winds across the Alaska Peninsula and out into the Aleutian Islands. Expect your winds to be about 30 to 40 knots and ultimately up to 50 to 60 knots out in the extreme western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look down at the 9,000 foot level, and again with that low pressure system coming on up into the picture, this will be by late afternoon. Earlier in the day, generally light winds, but it's going to come up rapidly to about 55 knots. 15 knots in the northern panhandle, about 10 to 15 knots along the North Gulf Coast, to about 20 knots as you move over western Alaska towards the Bering Strait region, 25 to 35 knot winds across the Arctic coastal areas, and then moving back down towards the Alaska Peninsula, about 25 knot winds can be expected there. And then as we move to the central to western Aleutian Islands, expect your winds to be about 35 to 40 knots, ultimately increasing to about 50 knots across that that Shemya area during the day tomorrow. Now we'll take a look at our turbulence for tomorrow. Occasional severe turbulence below 2,500 feet is what you should be looking out for over the southern panhandle with that strong wind regime coming up. Out across the Alaska Peninsula, some isolated moderate turbulence below about 2,000 feet can be expected there. And in the western Aleutian Islands, some widespread moderate turbulence below 2,000 feet can be expected there. That wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Cherry.
And I'm Forrest Kirst, a commercial pilot.
And today we're going to talk about an experiment we're doing using a small aircraft where we've mounted a sensor package to the aircraft to measure temperature, humidity, and pressure, as well as elevation and longitude and latitude of the airplane. And with the package, we're going to sample the local winter inversion here in Fairbanks, Alaska. And an inversion is where you have the surface atmosphere that's closest to the land is colder than the atmosphere above it, which is the opposite of normal conditions throughout the year throughout North America. Forrest, maybe you could tell us more about how a pilot experiences an inversion during the wintertime.
On the ground during our pre-flight, it's very cold out this morning. It's minus 28 centigrade, which is about minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So doing our pre-flight, it's extremely cold, hard on the airplane, hard on the people. For flying at the colder temperatures for doing these experiments, we're somewhere between minus 20 and minus 40 degrees. So we have to dress for that temperature inside the airplane as well as when we're outside of the airplane. When we're doing our pre-flight, we have to be extremely careful not to damage the plastic parts on the outside of the airplane. Extremely careful not to touch the metal parts with our fingers because we'll get contact frostbite. And we have to be real careful just with everything because it's just so cold. We have to dress as if we're going to be outdoors the whole time, and we use the aircraft heater to make it comfortable in our clothes and so we can see out the window. When we get the airplane running and we do our takeoff roll, we have increased engine performance and increased lift because of the colder, denser air. So we get off the ground earlier and have a better climb rate. When we reach the inversion layer, quite often the windows will fog up. The airplane's performance will decrease slightly because it's warmer air, produces less lift, and it produces less power from the engine.
When an inversion is present, air doesn't move anywhere, especially it doesn't want to move up. And so the classic look there is the steam out of the power plant or automobile exhaust, any kind of wood smoke or such, will come out of a chimney and then just flatten out and not move up. And if it moves horizontally at all, it's very slow, just creeping along. When you see that kind of lack of air movement, especially when there's clear skies, the sun is maybe low on the horizon, that is an inversion day in interior Alaska.
The reason it is so cool in the far north during winter is that the incoming radiation is at such a low angle. Now, as the atmosphere begins to cool in late fall, we start to get snowfall, which causes the land surface to be white, and light colors reflect incoming radiation right back, which causes additional cooling. And it's the reason we have a persistent inversion from late fall through early spring here in Fairbanks.
To get a radiation inversion to form, you need clear or mostly clear skies. You need no wind or very little wind down at the surface. And you need to have the sun under the horizon or high noon in December such that even if the sun is up, it's so low it doesn't really feed in any energy. When those three things happen, you lose heat to space from the surface of the Earth, but you're not getting any new heat in, and you get a very cold layer of air hugging the ground, cold, dense air that just lays down in the bottom of the valley. That's the classic radiation inversion setup.
So as we do our experiment with the aircraft, we're going to use a similar instrumentation package as is mounted on the standard weather balloons. We're going to measure temperature profiles, relative humidity, and pressure. And we're also going to tie the sensor package into a GPS unit, a global positioning system unit, so we know where the aircraft is located relative to the topography. So now I want to tell you about the instrument package that we're using on the aircraft. First of all, we use a NiCad 12-volt battery to power the data logger and the instruments. The data logger records the output from the meteorological sensors, which here include a temperature and relative humidity sensor and a pressure transmitter, which works like a barometer to measure atmospheric pressure. This particular one is going to plug into the static port in the aircraft, which also helps power some of the aircraft instruments. Finally, we have the Global Positioning System computer, which measures the latitude, longitude, and altitude of the aircraft. This one has an accuracy of about 10 meters, which is perfectly fine for what we're trying to do here. Here's a picture of our temperature and relative humidity sensor installed on the aircraft. So this is an FAA approved plate here mounted to the window. And we want the temperature sensor mounted towards the aft of the aircraft so we don't get air rushing in and it has a chance to equilibrate to the environmental conditions. And then finally, our pressure sensor is connected to this static port in the airplane, which again just measures the ambient pressure of the atmosphere where it hits this little hole in the plane. That's piped back into our pressure sensor inside. So one of the things that we're going to go out and do today is that we're going to attach the sensor package to the aircraft, and then Forrest is going to take off from Fairbanks International.
To get repeatability for the data, we flew in and out of Fairbanks International, Nenana Airport, Ladd Army Airfield, and Eielson Airfield. So we do a very slow climb up through the inversion layer, climbing at about 100 feet per minute. Just a very slow climb to the top of the inversion, find out where the ceiling is, and then once we're at the ceiling of the inversion, we do very slow porpoising up and down through the inversion to see if it's stable, if it's got different characteristics throughout it. Then we get to the next airport and we do a very slow descent into the airport at about 100 feet per minute, all the way to the ground.
Welcome back, and now let's take a look at our marine forecast for tomorrow, starting with southeast Alaska. You can see the winds are going to be jumping up pretty good and again, these 50 knotters, that's going to be late in the afternoon into the evening hours through the southern outside waters and southern inside waters out of the east, even a little bit northeast. Gale force east to northeast winds 35 knots in the inside waters of the central panhandle, and gale force northerly winds up through that Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. Let's move further north towards the east Gulf Coast, 15 to 25 knots as we get into those southern outside waters there. Taking a look at the forecast for Thursday, the winds again, and early on in the day, the winds won't be this strong. There's going to be a lull in the winds, and then that next system is going to come on up and increase the winds again late in the afternoon into the evening hours Thursday. Gale force winds south to southeast 35 knots in the southern outside waters to southeast to east 40 knots as we move on up towards that east Gulf Coast. Southeast winds 30 knots in the southern inside waters, and winds out of the north down through Lynn Canal Glacier Bay at about 20 knots. For the south central region on Wednesday, expect your winds to be small craft 25 knots, Prince William Sound and south of the Sound, with 20-knot winds south of the Resurrection Bay area over towards the Barren Islands. Across Kodiak Island, east to northeast winds about 20 to 25 knots, and then down Cook Inlet to the basically the Augustine area, 20 to 30 knot northeasterly winds down that inlet. Taking a look at the area for Thursday, expect your winds to be 30 knots in Prince William Sound out of the east and 40 knots south of the Sound along the North Gulf Coast, and these winds will be picking up late in the day. 25-knot winds along the North Gulf Coast over towards the Barren Islands to 30 knots south of Kodiak Island out of the east, and then northeast winds down Cook Inlet 25 to 30 knots with 25-knot winds from the Augustine area down through Shelikof Strait. Taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula for Wednesday, expect your winds to be out of the east 25 knots south of the eastern peninsula with northeast winds 20 knots in the Bristol Bay area, and expect your winds out of the southeast 30 knots south of the western Alaska Peninsula with east winds 20 knots on the north side of the peninsula. By Thursday, the winds are going to be northeast 25 knots from Bristol Bay down to the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, out of the northeast with north winds 25 knots south of the western Alaska Peninsula and northeast winds 30 knots south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands on Wednesday, expect your winds at least, you can see where the frontal boundary is with a sharp change in the wind direction. 25-knot winds out of the southeast, basically in the Unalaska area, and then northwesterly winds about 20 to 25 knots behind that front to 30 to 35 knots a little bit further back towards Adak, and northwest winds about 40 knots over the western Aleutian Islands out towards Shemya. By Thursday, expect your winds to be coming more southwesterly out by Shemya at about 25 knots. Remaining northwesterly, here's your high pressure ridge, 35 knots over the central to western Aleutian Islands just west of Adak at 35 knots. 30 to 35 knot winds across the Adak area, 20 to 25 knots as we get just west of the Nikolsk area with north winds 20 knots over the eastern Aleutian Islands. For the Bering Sea coastal waters, expect your winds to be out of the southeast 25 knots across the Pribilof Islands, east winds 20 knots in the Nunivak Island waters area with 25 to 30 knot winds from St. Lawrence Island down to St. Matthew Island out of the east. By Thursday, expect the winds to drop off considerably, about 10 to 15 knots over that St. Lawrence to St. Matthew Island area, as well as north of Nunivak Island. Northeast winds about 20 knots out of the Kuskokwim Bay area, with north winds 15 knots over the Pribilof Islands. For the Arctic coastal waters on Wednesday, the entire area is going to have easterly winds starting off at about 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound, increasing to about 35 knots as we get around towards Wainwright, 25 knots off of Barrow with 30 knot winds over the eastern Arctic coastal waters. By Thursday, the winds over the eastern Arctic coastal waters are going to be about 30 to 35 knots, 25 knot winds persisting over the Barrow area with gale force winds out of the east at 35 knots just off of Wainwright, and expect your winds to be about 20 to 25 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound up to the Cape Lisburne area. Taking a quick look at the forecast again for tonight, expecting showery type conditions in southeast Alaska with some rain or mixed rain and snow up towards that North Gulf Coast. Clear cold conditions can be expected over the interior from the eastern Brooks Range right on down towards the Bristol Bay region and towards the Bering Strait region. And then we have our frontal system coming across the Aleutian Islands, bringing some rain into the eastern Aleutian Islands. By tomorrow, do remember that we have a high wind watch out for the southern panhandle on up towards Sitka. East winds potentially 60 to 70 miles an hour. Windy, wet conditions are what you should anticipate for that region during the day tomorrow into the evening hours. We're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.